the Starfleet life with the USS Dauntless. Are you brave enough to be a Starfleet officer? Do you have what it takes?
Greetings, I'm Admiral Swart, Commanding Officer, USS Dauntless. Apologies, let me just adjust that. There we go. Uh, Swart, Commanding Officer, USS Dauntless, and this is the briefing with the Admiral for Stardate -269652.2. For those who are watching live, apologies for the late start. I've had to make a couple of adjustments to my technical setup today, and that took a little longer than I anticipated. You'll notice that I'm wearing my headset. I don't typically do that. So the audio quality is not quite what we're used to, but for today's session, having a stationary microphone is not going to work. So I've gone back to the old school headset, and we're going to be doing something a little different today, which I'm hoping will be interesting for you. So today's topic, we're going to be talking about Star Trek CCG, Star Trek the Customizable card game, which is a thing that's very interesting. Now, hang on, what's happening with my share? Apologies, this has gone weird again. All right, so for those who are here, I'd like to just thank everybody for joining us. We are these recording sessions happen every week on a Tuesday, typically at 12:30 South African Standard Time, which is admittedly a weird time. And because of that, we don't really expect anybody to be here. If you are an active duty member of the crew, you are welcome to join us in the screening room. It's a priority 3 mission, so nobody's required to attend, but if you are available at this time, you are welcome to join us, and you can participate in the chat and pitch in if you have any questions or comments as we go. Otherwise, you're welcome to watch us on YouTube. If you're not an active duty member of the crew, we stream live there as well. And hopefully I'll be able to see your questions and comments coming through from that side as well if you'd like to post any. But if you're not available at this time, which is most people, you're welcome to watch these videos later on YouTube or on Facebook. They will be uploaded to our page a little later today, and you can catch up there. You're welcome to contact me either by dropping a comment in the comments thread on either of those platforms, or you can message me directly. You can post a message on open channels in our Discord, or however other way. I will do my best to address your question there and then, but perhaps we might use your question as an inspiration for a future video, seeing how that goes. All right, so let us begin. Before we start talking about Star Trek CCG, let's talk about first why we're here and who we are and what this is all about. What is the USS Dauntless? So the USS Dauntless is a Star Trek fan club based in Cape Town, South Africa. We don't really like the term fan club. It's not very descriptive, but it is in essence what we are. So that's the core of what we are. We're a lot more than just a fan club, but it's not wrong to say that we are that. And we're based in Cape Town, South Africa, but that's not where all of our stuff happens. We are principally an online group. Our core of the warp core, as it were, of our starship happens to be on Discord. That's where all of our activity is coordinated from, and many of our activities happen on Discord itself. But we also do a lot of in-person stuff. We get together in groups of members in various cities around the world, not only in Cape Town, but various other cities all over the place, and do some stuff in real life. We're a Starfleet style club, complete with ranks, titles, and uniforms, which means that we have modeled styling our various aspects of our organizational structure after the fictional Starfleet. So it's the Starfleet that you see in Star Trek. We have tried to emulate them at least superficially in a number of ways. And some of those ways include the fact that we have ranks. We earn ranks through doing stuff in the real world. I am a rank Admiral, as I mentioned at the beginning. That means that I've spent a lot of time devoting to this organization, to my Starfleet career, to earn the right to call myself an Admiral. We have titles. My title, as I said, is Commanding Officer. If you'd like to know more about what a Commanding Officer is, in our previous week's briefing video, we did a whole section on the command department of the USS Dauntless, and you can go into excruciating detail about it there. And uniforms, as you'll notice, I'm wearing a Starfleet uniform. And again, I've done a briefing video on what uniforms are. what our uniforms are, why we wear them, how they work, and all that kind of thing. So I invite you to go take a look at that one too. But we have all of those things, and we are gathered together in the name of Star Trek. Why Star Trek? Why do we care about it? Well, Star Trek is the embodiment of Gene Roddenberry's vision for the future of humankind. What kind of a vision, and who's Gene Roddenberry? Well, this is Gene Roddenberry, this guy here. He's kind of the guy who began the whole Star Trek thing. He was the initial founder of the franchise. Many people have worked on the franchise since he began it, but he was the first guy, and he envisioned a future in which most of the major problems facing with humankind today have been solved. Crime, poverty, disease, war, etc., are pretty much all gone. And he imagined that this world could be achievable through a number of uh, uh, different avenues, progressing the world in a number of different ways, including technological, economic, social, and scientific advancement. And we as a group, not only do we see value in that utopian future, but we would actually like to help move the world in that direction. One of the ways that we do that is by sharing our love of Star Trek. In fact, so our mission here is to bring the message of Gene Roddenberry's vision for the future of humankind to the people of Africa and the Middle East. Why Africa and the Middle East? Well, because that is the region in which we are based. Starfleet, the International Star Trek Fan Association Incorporated, which is our parent organization, of which the Dauntless is a chapter, they are, as the name suggests, international, but they've broken up the Earth's surface into 20 geographic regions, one of which, Region 8, is basically Africa and the Middle East, and we are the flagship of Region 8. So that is the area in which we have the most influence, and we are focused specifically on that part of the world. Um, so this is our broad mission, but this mission is clarified in a number of what we call standing orders, 5 standing orders, and each one is of varying importance. The 2 most important ones are 1 and 2. And today we're going to be talking about something that falls under standing order number 1, which is to promote Star Trek to our friends, families, and the people around us. One of the ways we can do that is to simply show people the Star Trek series and films and that kind of thing, because those are interesting to watch. At least we think so. And if we expose other people to those things, maybe they will think so too. But one of the other ways we can do that is by getting more actively involved in the universe itself, by sort of engaging in the content in a less passive way. And the way that we do that is through Star Trek gaming. So there are a wide variety of Star Trek games available on the market, from video games to tabletop games to all kinds of other things. And we would like to, not only do we play those games ourselves with each other, but we like to promote playing those games to other people who might then, through discovering the game, might then move further into the Star Trek universe and learn to appreciate the universe as a whole, especially the Star Trek canon of films and series. So we're going to be talking about one specific game today, and that is Star Trek CCG. What is a CCG? CCG stands for Customizable Card Game. Let's switch over to this, or a collectible card game. Now, a CCG, that's kind of the old name for it. These days they're called trading card games, but it's basically the same thing. Essentially, the model works like this. You will construct a deck based on the cards in your collection. Typically, the way you begin playing is you will buy yourself a starter deck, which is a small 60 card deck, which is more or less playable out of the box. It's a commercial product, you will buy it. And then you will play against your friends and see who wins. Then you can customize your deck by buying additional cards, usually in the form of booster packs. I actually have a booster pack right here. This is my last remaining sealed Star Trek CCG booster pack. And these contain 8 or 10 cards. Yeah, 11 cards are inside this, and they are random. You don't actually know what's in this booster pack. It's sealed foil. You buy it, you open it, and you add those cards to your collection, and then you can use those cards to customize the deck that you're playing and hopefully make it stronger. And the trading aspect of it is, if you have surplus cards that you don't need, you can trade them with your friends to get cards that he might have that would be beneficial to your deck, but that he has no use for. Now, the Star Trek Customizable card game is one of the oldest trading card games in the market. I think the definitely the longest running. I don't know if it was the first. It may or may not have been the first one. Is Magic: The Gathering. I'm sure you've heard about it. If you know anything about tabletop gaming, you know of Magic: The Gathering. And it began in the early 90s. Star Trek CCG followed shortly thereafter. Once Magic the Gathering sort of took off and it started to demonstrate that there was an interest in the market for this kind of game, Paramount Pictures licensed a company called Decipher Incorporated to create a game around the Star Trek franchise, and they created Star Trek CCG, which was initially very popular. At one point, it was the second most popular TCG in the world, again, way back in the 90s, which was a very long time ago now. Um, it was so popular that after a few years, they revised the game and released what they call Star Trek CCG Second Edition, a second version of the game, which was, in my opinion at least, a vastly superior version of the game. It simplified the rules in such a way that we didn't have to memorize a rule book that had more pages than the D&D player's guide just to be able to play the game. The basic rules were much simpler, although the tactical complexity was preserved, but the complexity would then be written on the cards itself and not baked into the rules, which I think is a much better way of playing. That's how Magic the Gathering works, and most other successful TCGs go along the same way. Um, but then tragedy struck in 2007 when Paramount Pictures decided to remove the license from Decipher Inc. That's not the official story. The official story is that Decipher decided to drop the license for all Paramount products, but that doesn't make any sense. Why would they do that? Obviously, what happened was Paramount Pictures withdrew the license. Regardless, what happened was that Decipher Inc. was no longer allowed to continue making new expansion sets for Star Trek CCG. Oh, that's an important aspect I forgot to mention about these kinds of games. They will come in expansion sets. They will release a specific set of cards, a couple hundred cards, which will form the core set, and then every few months they will release an expansion set. So another couple hundred cards, which would then add to the whole card pool of available cards for the game. And that way you can keep collecting the game ad infinitum. Magic the Gathering, for example, releases 5 or 6 new expansion sets every year. Not all of them are playable in every format. Once a game reaches a certain level of complexity, with the card pool being big enough, you have to start introducing specific formats, or else it just gets completely out of hand. And Star Trek CCG released, I think it was 3 expansion sets a year up until 2007 when that license was removed. But then what happened was something, as far as I know, unprecedented in the industry. A team of Decipher game designers who had worked on Star Trek CCG under the employment of Decipher Incorporated got together with a group of some of the most active players of Star Trek CCG, and they formed a group called the Continuing Committee, and that's what's here on the screen now. The Continuing Committee, or Trek CC, their mission was to preserve and to continue to produce new Star Trek CCG cards. And that's exactly what they've done. They managed to get permission from both Paramount and Decipher to keep producing new virtual expansions for the game for Star Trek CCG, and they've continued to do so since then. So it's been nearly 20 years since they took over that project. There are some limitations to how they can do it. One of the limitations is that they are not allowed to charge any money for any of the cards that they produce, so it is free. 100% free to play, which means that you can download the cards to your computer. You can print out a deck and then play it with your friends without having to spend a cent, except of course for the printing fee. Um, and that is how the game is distributed online. So you can download the cards, print them, and play them for free. The other constraint is that the library of images that Paramount had given to Decipher Incorporated to produce the game was the sum total of the assets available to the Continuing Committee. They were not allowed to take any new images from new Star Trek in order to use for new cards. At the time, that wasn't a big deal because at that time, in 2007, there was no new Star Trek in production. So Star Trek Enterprise had ended in 2004, I think it was, and Star Trek 2009, the film that we now know of, 2009, hadn't yet begun being produced. So there hadn't been any new Star Trek in several years. Also at the time, Star Trek the animated series was not considered canon. So that library of material that Decipher was able to use consisted only of Star Trek the original series, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, and the up until that time 10 feature films? Yes, 10 films. Um, and that unfortunately means that to this day, that is the sum total of the library of images that we have access to. So anything new, any new elements or characters or ships or aspects of Star Trek that have been introduced since then, and there's been a lot of that in the last few years, can never be introduced into Star Trek CCG. So even though they are releasing new sets every few months, those sets cannot include any of that new content, unfortunately. But that's fine. There's still an awful lot of content baked in there. In fact, it's still more than half of all of Star Trek canon was included in that library. So there's still plenty of Star Trek to be had in Star Trek CCG. So what does it look like? What does the game look like? How does it work? Let us see if I can talk you through that. So this is an interesting new experiment that I'm going to try now. Commander Shimali has loaned me some equipment that I can use to hopefully demonstrate how this game works. So please bear with me as I'm working through it. Okay, let's see. Let me switch to the desktop view. Okay, all right. So here we have a basic game board of Star Trek CCG cards. So in a deck, they call it a 60 card deck because that is typically what it's meant to be. There are 3 sections to the deck. You have these 5 cards here that are your missions. We'll get into what each of those things mean in a moment. This blue pile to my right here is what they call simply the deck. And this black pile, I probably should have chosen a deck that didn't have black sleeves and a black background, but we're here. This pile here is called the dilemma pile. Now, your deck consists of, in theory, 60 cards altogether, 5 of which are your missions. It always has to be 5. I believe it is 30 of which have to be your deck, and the remaining 25 are in your dilemmas. You can go over 60. 60 is the minimum, but those are the minimum levels for each section of the deck here. You'll notice that I have 7 white pebbles here at the bottom, and we'll go into what that is about in a moment as well. Right, so the concept of the game is that you have to complete missions. So these missions here, let me hold this up to the camera so you can see what they are. There you go. Can you read that? There we go. So that says military exercises. Let me get my coordination right. And it has a point value here on this side of the card. It has a 35, and then it has a list of requirements here. It says leadership 2 officer, security, and cunning greater than 34. Now, what on earth does that all mean? I'll get to that in a moment. It also has a row of icons down the bottom there, which will look familiar to you if you're a Star Trek fan. And then it has a couple of other symbols here. It has an A over here and a little star field there, as well as the image over there. All of those things have meaning, and they're all relevant to the gameplay. So I'll explain what all of those things mean in a moment. If we look at another example of a mission, we see the Siege of AR-558. Let me get this angle correct. You'll notice that the list of requirements here are different. The score is different. That's 40 there. It still has an A. That symbol is different too. That looks like a little planet instead of a little field of stars. And there's a different set of icons at the bottom there. All of that is quite interesting. All right, so let us look at the deck. So the deck contains a number of different kinds of cards, including ships and personnel. Let me find a more interesting personnel than Reg Barkley. Here we go. Here's Data, here's Wesley Crusher, and here's Miles O'Brien. So the object of the game is that you have to bring in your personnel, your characters. Let me give you a closer look at Wesley Crusher. You can see he's wearing his trademark orange jersey, sweater. Oh, just trying to orient my hand. This is quite strange looking at my camera. There you go. Can you read that? Okay, you'll notice that he has a number of red dots. Each one has a skill listed to it: astrometrics, engineer, physics, programming. He also has a couple of icons down the side here. He has a little silver star and a little next generation comm badge. He has a row of blue blocks down the bottom that have his attributes there. He has that Federation logo at the top there. And he has a little point value there. He has a little number 3. So that's quite interesting. Data, you'll notice, is a little different. He has the same basic layout, but the skills listed on his card are different. He also has a different point value. He's worth 5 points. Miles O'Brien is also worth 3 points. And again, you can see the similarities and differences between these different cards. So what you do is you bring your personnel into the universe, and then this is your universe, by the way. These are all the different locations in your little universe that you're going to be playing with. You've got space missions, so these are the ones that have the little space logo here, and each mission represents a location in your galaxy. So this is some nebula somewhere. We're going to be going there to conduct military exercises. This is a planet. The planet specifically is AR558, so we're going to be besieging AR558, or perhaps we're going to be alleviating the siege of AR558. And this one here, we can intercept Renegade. You can see it's also a space mission. And here's another planet mission, Signal for Rescue. But now this one here is a little different. You'll notice that this one is Earth. And it has a little starbase symbol in the corner there, and it doesn't have a point value on this side. This is not technically a mission. This is your home base. It says here Federation Headquarters. What that means is when your characters and other assets come into the game, they begin their life in the game at Earth. So when Data comes into the game, he begins there. Wesley Crusher arrives there. Miles O'Brien arrives there as well. And then they move from Earth to other locations in your galaxy to complete those missions. How do they get there? Well, they use ships like this one. Here we have the Enterprise D. This is the alternate future version of the Enterprise. It has a cloaking device. It's got all kinds of interesting symbols down the side here. Some of these look familiar to you, and it has a point value of 7. Although it has the same attribute blocks down the bottom, the attributes are different. Here it has range, weapons, and shields instead of the integrity, cunning, and strength that there are on personnel. And we'll get into what all of that means as well. So when your ships arrive in the game, they also arrive at your headquarters at Earth. Your crew can then beam aboard your ship and travel from location to location within your galaxy and attempt the mission. Okay, that's the broad strokes of how that works. There are a couple of other types of cards that are in your deck as well. One of which is called an event. Looks like this. It has a little green swirly icon in the corner there. This one says it's called Party Atmosphere, and it says plays in your core. When a player plays an event in his or her core, he or she chooses an opponent. For each headquarters mission that opponent commands, this event is cost -1. So what is your core? It's the cards on this side of the table here. So you can have a row of events sitting in your core, and their effect is passive. So whenever something happens that's relevant to this thing, in the case of this one, when a player plays an event, that means it's going to modify the cost of that event. Another kind of card that is available here is an interrupt. So this interrupt has a little red squidgy icon in the corner there. You'll notice that it has no point value. An interrupt is a card that can be played at any time as long as it's relevant. So in this case, it says to play this interrupt, you must command a ship with your engineer personnel aboard. Then it says order, this ship is range +4 until the end of this turn. The thing about interrupt cards is although they are free to play, they're only relevant at specific moments. So you have to meet the requirements and then you can activate it when the time arises. I think there's one other kind of card that I have represented in this deck. I may in fact not have it, and that is equipment. So equipment is as the name suggests, it's a card that can be carried around by your personnel, which gives them extra abilities. I don't have any equipment in this deck. Apologies. But that's fine. You get the basic idea. So when you begin the game, each player draws 7 cards. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You have a hand consisting of 7 cards. And then if it's my turn, I begin my turn with the recruiting phase. In the recruiting phase of my turn, I have to bring assets from my hand into play. And each asset has a point value. So this has a point value of 1. This one has a point value of 3, 7, and 3. Now how do I spend points? Well, that's where these white pebbles come in. These are energy tokens. I can spend up to 7 energy tokens per turn to bring cards into the game. In fact, I must spend all 7 every game. If I'm unable to spend all 7 of my tokens, the game is over. So it's easy enough in my first turn to spend all 7 tokens to bring in the USS Enterprise D because she costs 7. So there she is. She's arrived at my Earth, but there's nobody available to fly her. I have spent all 7 tokens this turn. There's nothing more I can do. So I pass turn to my opponent. My opponent can do whatever he or she is doing, and then he passes back to me. It is now my turn again. You'll notice that I'm not drawing a card at the beginning of my turn. Most TCGs, you draw a card for free at the beginning of your turn. That is not true in Star Trek CCG. Here we have no free card draw. If I wanted to draw a card, I would have to pay an energy token, and that's how I would afford that. I've now got a second copy of the USS Enterprise J, which is not a ship, interestingly enough. It's an event. Alright, so I can now spend another 6 tokens worth of points in order to summon cards into the game. I'm going to spend 5 cards to bring data. So he arrives at my Earth. When he arrives in the battlefield, or in play, sorry, this isn't the battlefield, this isn't Magic. When he arrives in play, I present him to my opponent to inspect. So my opponent can see who has arrived at my Earth. I then flip him face down at my Earth, and it's my business where data goes from there. I only have to reveal his presence and location to my opponent again during the game if I need to prove something. And I'll get to what that means in a moment. Right, so I've spent 6 tokens so far this turn. I'm going to spend 1 more token to play Party Atmosphere in my core. Remember Party Atmosphere? This is a 1-drop event, and it modifies the price of all future events that I might play. So it's just going to sit there, and it has a passive effect. I've spent all my tokens, I pass back to my opponent. Instead of going through this turn by turn, I'm just going to fast forward a couple of turns. I'm going to quickly play through a couple of turns and pretend like this is normal gameplay. I've got a few personnel that are now in play. See, I brought in Miles O'Brien, Wesley Crusher, William T. Riker. He's the Salt and Pepper future version of Admiral Riker. I've got Luther Sloan, here he comes. The Section 31 guy, Tasha Yar, there she is, she's great. Leonard H. McCoy, the Admiral Leonard H. McCoy from the first episode of Next Generation. I've got a couple of nobodies like Davies, he doesn't even have a first name. Neither does Lopez, the random security officer. These are people who don't really matter. And at least one version of Captain Jean-Luc Picard. Well, let me show that to you. Okay, so I fast forwarded a few turns. These are the people that I have now. They've all arrived at Earth over the last few turns. What I can now do is I now have a sizable number of personnel available in game. Now I'm ready to go and attempt some missions. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to beam everybody onto my ship. And the reason I had to wait is because of these icons down here. So these are the staffing requirements for the ship. I need to have at least 1 personnel with that icon on it. That's easy enough to get. They all have that. So they all have the Federation icon on there. So as long as I've got at least 1 person, then that's good. Then I need 2 people with those gold command icons on it. If we look at Wesley Crusher, you'll see he doesn't have the gold command icon. So we need to find at least 2 people that have that. And I do have at least 2. Data, he's got the gold command icon. You get the angle there. And let's see. Leonard H. McCoy, he has the gold icon. So that requirement is now met. Then I need at least 3 silver star icons. Wesley has one of those. So does Lopez. And so does Davies. So I've met the staffing requirements for the Enterprise D. We can now fly off and go and attempt some missions. How far can we fly? So if we look at this, the way that I indicate these guys are aboard the ship, they've been from my Earth to the Enterprise D. They go underneath there, so we've now got a stack. So if you look at that stack there, my opponent can see that I've got some personnel aboard that ship. I might need to demonstrate that I have the necessary staffing requirements to my opponent, but then everybody else who's aboard is my secret. So now how far can we fly? We look at the range of my ship. We see the range here is 10. That means she's quite fast. If we look at each one of these missions, it has a span at the bottom. Here she has a span of 2 light years. Now I want to fly to this mission that looks like it's next door, but that is actually an illusion. So these locations are not lined up like this in the fictional world of the game. This is a representation of 3-dimensional space, and they're not necessarily lined up that way. So I take the span of Earth, and I take the span of military exercises, which is 3 light years. I add those together, which gives me 5, and I deduct that from the ship's range, 10. So 10 minus 5 is 5. This ship can actually make that journey from this location to this location and back again in 1 turn. That tells me how many light years this ship can travel in a single turn. So we're going to travel over here to military exercises, and we're going to declare to my opponent that I'm attempting this mission. The 2 things that I have to specify to my opponent is how many personnel are on my ship. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I have to declare what kind of mission it is. In this case, it is a space mission. It has a little space icon there, as opposed to a planet mission. Now, the way that those are different is that when I'm attempting a space mission, I'm attempting them from the space ship. So everybody who's on the ship is automatically included in the mission attempt. However, if I was at a planet mission, I could select an away team. Let's say these guys, they would beam down to the planet and they would attempt the mission from down there, leaving potentially some people up on the ship. If I want to beam down everybody, I can. That means that that ship is unstaffed, but it's okay. It's just floating there in orbit. And when I'm completed with the mission, I can beam back up again and fly off. but I'm able to split the crew into multiple teams. With a space mission, I'm not able to do that. Everybody aboard the ship is completing the mission. It says as attempting the mission, and my opponent has to react to that appropriately. So at this point, my opponent has to select dilemmas. So I've declared that I've got 10 personnel attempting a space mission. My opponent would then go to his dilemma pile. So I'm going to go to my own dilemma pile here, which is not how this would normally work. But if you can imagine, I have an imaginary opponent across from me, and he is drawing from his dilemma pile. He would draw 10 cards from the top of his dilemma pile because I'm attempting with 10 personnel. He gets to draw 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. He turns those over, and he can look and see which dilemmas he's now drawn. He must first whittle out any cards that are inappropriate. So how are they inappropriate? So you'll notice that some of these dilemmas have a planet symbol, some of them have a space symbol. In fact, none of these have a space symbol, but some of them have a little dual symbol. So this has a little planet in a star field. Dual means it can work on any mission. The planet symbol means it can only work on planet missions, and if it had a little space symbol, it would mean it could only work on space missions. This is a space mission, so these planet dilemmas are not applicable here. I'm going to put them face down in front of me for now, because they're not going to work. Once I'm sure I've eliminated all the inappropriate ones, I check to see if there are any duplicates. I have no duplicates. These are all one-offs. Is my audio working? Yes, it's working. That seems to be fine. Okay. Sorry, I had a weird moment with my audio. There we go. That seems to be okay now. I'm just going to mute that because that looks like it was creating a bit of an echo, but it should be fine. All right, so okay, so I've eliminated any inappropriate dilemmas from the dilemmas drawn. Now I have to choose how many I'm going to give my opponent. So he has 10 personnel attempting a mission. That means that I get to spend 10 points worth on dilemmas that I give to him. So you'll see there's a point value on each dilemma. That one's worth 3, that one's worth 4, that one's worth 4, that one's worth 0. That's interesting. 3, 2, and 2, and 3. Now I can only spend up to 10 points worth, so I'm not going to go into the strategy about how to choose proper dilemmas. I know these dilemmas quite well, so I'm just going to put together an assortment of which ones I think might be good choices. I'm going to grab these. These are the ones I'm not going to use this time, so I'm going to put those also face down on this pile. So I've got 10 points worth of dilemmas here. I'm also then going to select which order I want my opponent to face them in. I want him to face this one first, then this one, then this one, and then this one. I place that pile face down in front of my opponent, and these ones that I've set aside, these go face up underneath, excuse me, they go face up underneath my dilemma pile. That's so that once I get through this entire dilemma pile, when I get to the face up ones, I can reshuffle the face up pile and draw from them again later. So they're not lost. I'm going to get to them in the future. I now switch back to being myself again, and now I'm going to face these dilemmas that have been given to me by my opponent. So I draw the first one off the top and examine it. This one says pinned down. Let me try and get the angle there so you can see it. Randomly select a personnel to be stopped. Full stop. Okay, so let's do the first thing first. Randomly select a personnel to be stopped. I pull all the personnel that are attempting the mission and randomly select one. There we go. That's the one that's going to be randomly selected. Who is that? That's Davies. Davies is stopped. What does stopped mean? It means that he cannot do anything else this turn. He is busy, occupied with this dilemma. There's nothing else that he can do. So he is stopped for now. He'll be fine. He's not dead. Next turn he'll be able to continue. But for the rest of this turn, there's nothing more he can do. And we go back to reading the dilemma. If you still have 9 personnel remaining, randomly select a second personnel to be stopped. As a matter of fact, I do still have 9 personnel remaining. So I'm going to randomly select a second one to be stopped. Let's select this one. That is William T. Riker. William T. Riker is stopped. Nothing I can do about that. The rest of them continue. Now we keep reading. If you still have 10 personnel remaining, randomly select a third personnel to be stopped. Well, I don't. I now have 8 personnel remaining, so I don't have to worry about that. This dilemma is now overcome. So I'm going to place this face up underneath that mission, and the rest of my crew continues with the mission attempt by facing the next dilemma. Guess who's coming to dinner? choose a personnel who has diplomacy or integrity greater than 6 to be stopped. All right, let's find that. Somebody who has diplomacy. So I look through my personnel and see which one of them has diplomacy listed as a skill there. Nope, 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 nope. There we go. Jean-Luc Picard has 2 diplomacy listed as a skill, so I'm going to set him aside. Oh, okay, he's the only one. But I also can choose somebody who has integrity greater than 6. So let's see if I have anybody with integrity greater than 6. There's integrity. He's got integrity 8. Does Wesley Crusher? No. Tasha Yar does, so she's on the list. Miles O'Brien does, he's on the list. Luther Sloan definitely doesn't. Leonard McCoy does. Data has integrity 6, so that's not greater than 6. Lopez, no, and we're back to there. So these guys are spared from this dilemma. They go back there, and now we have to choose a personnel. So I get to choose which one of these is going to be stopped. So I'm going to choose Tasha Yar to be stopped. She's going to join the pile of stopped personnel. These guys continue. And then we keep reading the dilemma. If you cannot, randomly select a personnel to be killed. Luckily, I was able to select somebody, so nobody dies. This dilemma is overcome. It joins the pile there. Next, Ornaran's threat. Randomly select a personnel to be stopped. Full stop. Okay, so randomly select. There's one. It's going to be Luther Sloan. He is stopped. We continue. Unless you have diplomacy and medical or 2 security. Diplomacy and medical or 2 security. Let's see if I have that. Diplomacy, I know that only Picard has that. There we go. He's got diplomacy. And Leonard H. McCoy, he should have medical because he's a doctor. There we go. He does indeed. I don't need to check for 2 security because I've met the first requirement. Unless you have diplomacy and medical or 2 security, that personnel is killed instead. Okay, so Luther Sloan doesn't die, then all the other personnel are stopped and the dilemma returns to its owner's dilemma pile. Luckily, he was only stopped and that's the only negative outcome of this dilemma, so it is overcome and the rest of the team continues. Now, it's worth noting that you cannot abort a mission attempt once it has begun. You have to keep going. As long as you have personnel who are able to continue the mission attempt, they must do so. They need to keep going. Next. Telepathic deception. Unless you have biology, exobiology, and security, or telepathy and cunning greater than 28. All your personnel are stopped, and this dilemma returns to its owner's dilemma pile. Okay, let's try the first one. Do I have biology, exobiology, and security? Maybe. Leonard H. McCoy has biology and exobiology. Do I have anybody with security? There we go. Lopez has security. So these 2 guys overcome this dilemma, and there's no other consequences. This one is overcome completely. So it goes face up underneath the mission. And the remaining crew, it can now face the mission itself. So the mission requirements here are leadership, 2 officer, security, and cunning greater than 34. So let's find leadership. Admiral McCoy has leadership. Does he have officer? He does not. Does anybody have officer? Jean-Luc Picard has officer. That's 1 officer. Miles O'Brien does not. Data does. So that's 2 officer. That's that requirement met. Next, I need security. Now, we already learned that Lopez has security. There it is. He has that. And then we have to have cunning greater than 34. So we add up the cumulative cunning of everybody that remains and see what we have there. So Data has cunning 10 because he's Data and he's very clever. So that's 10. Lopez is not that bright. He only has cunning 5. So we're on 15. Wesley Crusher is also pretty smart. He has cunning 7. So we're on 22. Leonard H. McCoy has cunning 6, so we're up to 28. Jean-Luc Picard also has a cunning 6, so we're up to 34. So we are at 34, but we need to be over 34. Luckily, we have Miles O'Brien. That takes us over 34. So in 1 attempt, we have completed this mission. The way we indicate that we've completed it is we pull it half a card length toward myself. Things get a little bit cramped on these boards a little bit. There we go. So that mission has now been pulled half a card length towards myself, and I have scored 35 points. That's how many points this mission is worth. And that brings me to how you win this game. So you have to meet 2 requirements, 3 requirements. Firstly, you have to score 100 points. The principal way of scoring points is by completing missions. So I've scored 35 points there. And I also have to complete at least 1 space mission. I've now completed 1 space mission and 1 planet mission. like that. So one planet, one space, and 100 points. This deck is set up that I can, in theory, complete 2 missions and score the 100 points that I need. How do I do that? Well, if we look at the USS Enterprise D, it has a special ability there in the text. When you complete a mission requiring honor or leadership, if this ship is at that mission, score 5 points, or score 10 points if that mission requires both. Well, this mission did not require honor, but it did require leadership, so I score a bonus 5 points, which means that I'm now on 40 points. I need 60 points and a space mission in order to win. I'm not going to go through the full thing, but you get the idea. I would then, if I wanted to attend that, I could go to the nearest planet, beam down an away team, and attempt that mission. Except it wouldn't be able to, this turn, include the people who are stopped. So these personnel, they are stuck on the ship, they can't do anything. But the ones who are not stopped, they could, in theory, go and attempt another mission this turn and see how far we get. And so we go. So we slowly build up the number of personnel that are on the board. We attempt all the missions we possibly can, and we try to get through it. Now, this deck is what we call a Federation TNG deck, next generation deck. Why do we say that? Well, they are Federation, obviously, United Federation of Planets logo in the corner, and most of the personnel and ships in this deck have this little symbol here, the TNG symbol, which means that they are part of the TNG part of the Federation. Why? What does that mean? Why do we have that? So, okay, I think we're done with the table. Let me switch back to this one. There we go. All right, so as with most TCGs, you have a card pool that is divided up according to various different flavors, I suppose you could call it. In something like Magic the Gathering, the 5 flavors are the 5 different colors of Magic: black, green, white, blue, and red. And each one has a different way of expressing themselves in the game. Star Trek CCG is no different. And in Star Trek CCG, there are a few other different flavors, more than just 5. Let me see how many there are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There are basically 10 different flavors, of which Federation is one. So I just showed you some of the Federation cards, what they look like. But obviously most of the characters and people that we see in Star Trek are members of the Federation, which means that if we're going to be borrowing characters and objects from the Star Trek canon to incorporate into the game, we're going to be looking at a massive overcorrection in favor of the Federation. Most of the cards are going to be Federation, which wouldn't really be fair if you want to play against one of the other factions. So what they've done is they've split the Federation up into a bunch of different sort of sub-flavors. I think faction is the correct term, but that doesn't really make sense because they're not really factions, they're just different aspects of the same thing. So the TNG faction or flavor of the Federation represents characters and instances that appeared in the Next Generation part of the Star Trek canon. So typically characters that were introduced in the Next Generation series or in the Next Generation films. There is also the original series. So here I can show you. This camera might be good enough. Here we see an original series edition of Captain James T. Kirk. This is specifically from the movie Wrath of Khan, and he's got a different little symbol here. There, he's got a little Starfleet Delta from the original series. So he's still Federation. He still has most of the same requirements, but the stuff looks a little different. This is a fancy version of a card. It's a foil version of the Enterprise ship. It's sideways. Usually the ship cards are up this way, like the other one you saw, but this one is sideways because it's fancy. But you can see it's also an original series card. So how are they different? So the Next Generation are their sort of the flavor and what makes them work in the game is that they are focused around scoring bonus points for doing basic things. So completing missions, scoring bonus points, making sure that your ship is staffed in the right way so that you can score the bonus points as you go. But with the original series stuff, what they are more about adjusting the casting cost or the introduction cost for recruiting those ships and personnel. So as the personnel comes in, they have the normal cost that you pay up in the corner, but most of them in the text will have an option saying you can pay 2 extra for this personnel, and if you do that, this extra thing happens. That's really typical for the original series. There's also Deep Space Nine, which I don't actually have in front of me. What happened to my Deep Space Nine? Oh, I got one. So Deep Space Nine, there's Benjamin Sisko. You can see he's got the little DS9 logo there. This camera's not quite as good as the other camera, but you can take my word for it. So he's also Federation. He's got the same Federation stuff going on up here, but this little symbol down there is different. He's got the Deep Space Nine symbol. And they, instead of arriving at Earth, will arrive at a mission which is Deep Space Nine, what they call Mouth of the Wormhole. Deep Space Nine. There's a different version of Mouth of the Wormhole called Terok Nor, which represents a specific story arc in the series Star Trek Deep Space Nine, in which the station was under control by the Dominion forces during the Dominion War. That's actually one of my favorite decks. That's a whole other story. Let me not get distracted. Sorry, I've dropped something. I'm back. Um, And what's interesting about the DS9 deck is that it's not limited to just Federation. You can incorporate characters that are non-aligned and Bajorans into the same deck because, of course, that is how that series worked in Deep Space Nine. So that's pretty cool. And you could also obviously use the USS Defiant, which is great for me. I quite like the USS Defiant. Another version uh, of Federation is Voyager. So Voyager is particularly interesting. Here we go. Here's the USS Voyager, and she's got the little Voyager symbol there, and here you can see Captain Janeway. There's Captain Janeway. She's also got the same little symbol. Now, what makes the Voyager deck interesting is that they don't have a headquarters mission because, of course, in the series they're stranded in the Delta Quadrant. They can't get to and from Earth very easily, and that same thing is represented in the game. So they get benefits from sticking to Delta Quadrant missions. Oh, that's the thing I didn't mention specifically. So here is the mission card that has the little A. That A represents Alpha Quadrant. If this had a little Delta symbol on it, that would be Delta Quadrant. If it had a little Gamma symbol, it would be Gamma Quadrant. The game doesn't distinguish between Alpha and Beta Quadrants because, as in Star Trek canon, most of the stuff happens sort of along the border of the Alpha and Beta Quadrants. Earth is actually right on the border, on the line between Alpha and Beta. So they treat Alpha and Beta as being pretty much the same thing. When they talk about Alpha Quadrant during the Dominion War, they actually mean Alpha and Beta Quadrants. It's a whole thing. The game doesn't treat them separately because canon doesn't treat them separately. But because there is no headquarters mission available for the Voyager crew, they have a little setup of cards which is interesting. So for your Voyage deck, you have to include this mission, the Caretaker's Array, which is not a headquarters, it's just a regular completable mission. But if you have this mission, if you control it, it allows you on your first turn to download a card. Download means that you basically pull it out of your deck into your hand and you can play it. It downloads this card, which allows you to then download the USS Voyager, which you wouldn't necessarily have in your opening hand, but you can arrange it so that you have your USS Voyager in play by the second turn, and then you can play your Federation personnel directly to the USS Voyager. Instead of having to have them arrive at Earth and then you go and fetch them, they arrive directly on your ship. So that's the cool thing about playing a Voyager deck, is that you get your ship out nice and quickly and you can have people arrive directly there. And also there is a way of making it for a Voyager deck so that you don't have to meet the planet mission requirement. So you still have to score 100 points, you still have to complete a space mission, but you don't have to complete a planet mission if you build your deck the right way. All right, those are the different flavors of Federation, but let's do a quick run through of all of the other flavors, all the other different kinds of decks that you can build. So what I haven't mentioned, of course, is Starfleet. So what is Starfleet? Well, Federation Starfleet, but what about before the Federation? What about Enterprise? That is listed as a separate affiliation. So here you've got Starfleet. You'll notice that the symbol here is different. This is actually the Enterprise mission patch. So that although they are Starfleet, they are not United Federation of Planets. They look quite similar, but you'll notice that the color is different. There you go. You can see the design elements are slightly different, but similar. They have a very similar flavor to Federation, but they are not mutually interchangeable. They can't be played together without some way of making that happen. And the way that they keep that separate is that the headquarters mission for most Federation decks is Earth, and also the headquarters mission for the Starfleet is also Earth. But each version of Earth, there are 3 or 4 different versions of Earth in the game, only allow you to recruit a specific version of Federation people to that Earth. And the Starfleet version of Earth doesn't allow you to recruit Federation personnel to it. And you can only have one version of Earth in your deck. So that's what limits you there. You can't play Starfleet and Federation. You have to pick one. It is possible to mix your deck. You can have more than one faction in your deck. If you really, really wanted to mix Federation and Starfleet, the way you'd do that is you'd play your Starfleet Earth with Deep Space Nine, which would then allow you to play Deep Space Nine Federation personnel to it. That might work. But I haven't actually seen anybody do that. I wonder why that's the case. Maybe it's not very synergistic. All right, so that's Starfleet. You also have, of course, Klingons. Here's some Klingon cards. We've got Martok there, and we've got a ship. You can see what that looks like. So the same basic layout applies, all the same information is present, but the visual style is very Klingon. It's kind of red black background. It's got the red logo in the top there, and we've got a foil version of this Klingon ship, which is pretty cool. We've got Romulans as well. Here we have Shinzon, the Romulan Praetor, although he is actually a human. You can see from the symbol here that he belongs to the Romulan faction. So he, remember, if you remember your film, he is a clone of Jean-Luc Picard. So his species is human, but his faction is Romulan, and there is a Romulan ship. It's an old style Romulan bird of prey, which also is a foil card, which is pretty cool. All right, we've got the Dominion, which is interesting. The Dominion, here's Wei Yun. He is one of the Dominion characters. You, of course, get founders. You get Jem'Hadar and Vorta, all in Dominion. He is a Vorta. You get some Dominion ships. Oh, what I neglected to tell you about Klingons and Romulans is how they play. So Klingons, they are, as you might expect, focused around combat. So I didn't go through combat when I did my little demonstration in a moment ago, and that is because in Star Trek CCG, combat isn't necessarily part of the core game. It is a dynamic that you are able to use if you wish, but it's not required. You don't have to fight your opponent. Star Trek CCG isn't a battle, it's a race. You need to complete your requirements before your opponent does, but battle can work for you. So if you're playing a battle-focused deck, especially Klingons or Dominion, battle can be used to help slow down your opponent or to gain you benefits. So how does battle work? You need to, first of all, you need to have a card that allows you to activate battle. It'll be a specific kind of card. It'll say begin an engagement or begin combat. An engagement is a ship-to-ship battle where you're having your two ships fight each other, or combat is a personnel-to-personnel battle. You have your people fighting each other. And then on the card that allows you to activate combat, it will give you the consequences of combat. So if you win, then it will tell you what happens. So maybe if you win a ship-to-ship battle, the losing battle, it's the losing ship takes some damage. Or maybe if you're playing Borg, if you win a ship-to-ship battle, you get to steal two of your opponent's personnel and add them to your ship. You've assimilated them. Or maybe you are, if you're playing Cardassian, here's Cardassian. Can see what they look like. If you're playing Cardassian, you're stealing a couple of people and putting them in your brigs so that you can torture them for information. That's quite grim, but that is the Cardassian flavor. I mentioned Borg, but I didn't show you Borg. Here we go. And Dominion and Klingons have ways of scoring bonus points through combat. So if you win combat, you score 10 points or 15 points or whatever, which then helps bring you closer to your victory. If you're piling up damage markers on your opponent's ships, you can destroy the ship with all personnel present. So one popular strategy with Klingon decks is that I will load up my ship with just enough personnel to make it flyable. I will then fly over to your side of the board and attack your ship 3 times in a row, destroying it. So that sets you back 5 or 6 turns or however long it took you to build up that crew and that ship. So you have to start again pretty much from scratch. So while you're busy building up your new crew, I can go and complete missions and hopefully hit my victory requirements before you've had a chance to rebuild. Dominion could do that kind of thing as well. Another thing that's specific to Dominion is called infiltrators. So they can hide personnel on your ship and have them do nasty things to slow you down. Romulans are very sneaky. Their sort of flavor is that they will prevent you from doing the things that you want to do. You say, well, I want to give you a dilemma. They'll say, nope, I don't want that dilemma. I want a different dilemma instead. Or I want to attempt the mission. No, you can't attempt that mission. You have to attempt this other mission instead. Or you have to do this other thing. Or everybody stopped or somebody dies. They like to sneak things into your gameplay. Bajorans, typically you wouldn't play Bajorans on their own. Here's a couple of Bajorans. Here's Kieran Reese and a Bajoran ship. Bajorans work well in conjunction with other factions, especially with Federation in the DS9 deck. They also work well with some non-aligned personnel in what they call a Maquis deck. Maquis is not it's not an affiliation within the game, but it is a faction. You can build a Maquis deck from multiple different affiliations. Bajorans work well with them. As you might imagine, the Bajoran flavor is that they have religion on their side, so they can appeal to the prophets to gain benefits either from personnel that have already died or bring personnel back from the dead or that kind of thing. So that's the Bajoran dynamic. And then of course you have Ferengi, which look like this. I actually quite like the coloring of the Ferengi faction cards. They're pretty cool. Let me try and get that right. There we go. Here you've got Quark and you've got a Decora class Marauder. Ferengi have, as you might imagine, a dynamic that allows them to accumulate gold pressed latinum and then use that latinum to purchase benefits from the game. I've seen a very effective Ferengi deck that allowed the user to avoid doing any mission attempts until he had purchased enough dilemmas under each one of his missions that he no longer had to face any dilemmas at all. He could just load a handful of personnel onto a very small ship, go from mission to mission, and win the game in a single turn. It took him a few turns to build up those dilemmas under each of his missions, but once he had it done, it was very easy for him. And then, of course, as I mentioned, we have personnel that don't fit into any of those affiliations, and they are non-aligned, like Khan Noonien Singh or the Kumari here. So they don't fit into any of the factions. They are typically playable alongside any other affiliation except Borg. Borg are the only one that you can't have non-aligned personnel on a Borg cube unless they have been assimilated from the Borg's opponent. And then they become Borg, as it were. There is also a new affiliation, which I don't have any examples of in front of me because they are so new, and it is the first affiliation that has been added to the second edition game since they went digital. Since 2007 and the Trek CC took over the sort of management of the game, they haven't added any new affiliations to it, but they added one, I think it was in the most recent virtual set, and that is Vidians. So if you remember the early seasons of Star Trek Voyager, one of the races that they encountered in the Delta Quadrant was the Vidians, and there is a Vidian affiliation in the game now with a handful of cards and ships and that kind of thing, which is interesting. So their whole mechanic is about capturing people and stealing body parts or something. I'm not entirely clear on how that works in gameplay point of view, but that's an interesting dynamic. You'll notice that all of these things are from second edition. Although the Trek CC, let me bring that back up again. Trek CC does still release. Excuse me, my non-humanoid companion is making a noise. They do still release virtual sets for the first edition of the game. I just don't have any interest in first edition because I think that second edition is a superior game. You can see here, these are all of the sets that the Trek CC has released over the years, and they are all downloadable. How do you do that? How do you build a virtual deck? How do you get these virtual cards? They provide on their website, although it looks kind of low tech, it's actually quite sophisticated. You can set up an account and you can build your own decks, or you can copy other people's decks. Plenty of people will post their own decks publicly so you can see how it works. You can download a copy of the deck, add it to your own deck builder, and then print it out. So here's my deck builder. I've done exactly that. I was building some starter decks not that long ago, so I've added those to my library, and down here I've got a couple of decks that I've designed myself. So here's one Cadet Ship Destroyer. This is one that I built. It's one of my own personal decks. I have it around here somewhere, and so I imported it into their deck building system so that it was available so that other people could see it. I'm not going to show you the full deck builder system here. It's kind of clunky on the website. What they have is a full library of every single card available. Oh, an important point that's worth noting here. A few years back, Trek CC got permission to make all of the original Star Trek CCG cards. So all of those that were published by Decipher Incorporated up until the point where they lost the license. All of those original Star Trek CCG cards are now also available for print and play. So the entire Star Trek CCG library is now available here. So you're not limited to only the new stuff that was added by Trek CCG. You have the entire library. There's no longer any requirement to go out and buy physical cards. Not that they're producing them anymore, but there's still old stock floating around in various stores around the world. No need to purchase those anymore. You can just download the deck that you want to build. So you build it here on their website, and you can then print it like this. So you export it to a PDF, and it comes out like this. You take it to your local print shop, you cut it up, and you sleeve it. So these are what the cards look like. They look pretty cool. This is one of my decks that I've built, and you can, if you wish to, go and print your own copy of this deck and play it against me. One of the advantages of this here is that you get the latest version of the card. There have over the years crept into the game errata, so printing errors. Pardon me, I need a sip of my beverage. There we go. errata have accumulated over the years. They've had to make corrections. So if you're printing and playing your deck using the latest version of the card, then all of those adjustments have been made. One of the changes they made a few years back was with mission cards specifically. Most of the ones that were just generic, so what generic means is it looks like this one, it just has a title and it didn't have a location listed underneath there. You'll see that this one has a location, Brassiota, and Advanced Battle Simulation. This one, the original version, was simply called Advanced Battle Simulation and didn't have that location there. They've updated most of those missions now to also have a location so that they work better with certain game dynamics, which it was a little bit untidy before, and they've just neatened that up because that's how the game situation works now. Um, so that's how you do it. So you go onto the website, you download a deck, and you print it. You can build your own deck from the full card library there. There are third-party tools available that you can use as perhaps a superior deck building application. One of them is called DeckPad. I don't have it installed, but it's available. DeckPad is a tool that allows you to download the full library of images from an online resource, and you can build your own deck on your PC. Another version of that made by somebody else is called Nebula, which is the one I prefer. Again, I don't have it installed, so I can't show it to you here. But if you crawl through the forums here on the Trek CC website, you can find all the relevant details there. It's a nice visually based deck building application. You can build your deck from on your local PC and then export the deck list here to the Trek CC deck builder, and then download your deck from there. There is also an online way of playing this game using a platform called Lackey CCG. Now, this probably requires an entirely separate briefing video because Lackey is quite complex. It's a free virtual tabletop system. It looks kind of like this in the image, and it's compatible with just about any TCG system. It just requires a few tweaks here and there in the UX to make it work with any given game system, and it is There we go. It is pretty much the only way of playing Star Trek CCG online. It is possible to play with Tabletop Simulator, which is a premium virtual tabletop tool available on Steam, but the Star Trek CCG port into Tabletop Simulator, I understand, is not kept up to date very well with new expansions. So this is really the only way that it's done. For competitive play online, this is also the only way it's done, is using Lackey CCG. You download the Star Trek CCG module, which sets up all the relevant tabs to make it compatible with your game, and then you can import your decks directly from the Trek CCG website into Lackey CCG and then play online from there. I'll try to get that set up so we can do that in another briefing, and perhaps that's something we could do online on the Dauntless. But for now, playing with real physical cards, I think, is probably better for everybody. The game itself is complicated enough without also having to learn a fairly complex and not very intuitive application in order to play it online. So once you know how to play the game, starting using physical cards, you can then translate that knowledge into playing online using something like Lackey CCG. All right, so I think that is everything. Let me see if there are any questions. Let me switch to this. There we go. All right, so there's been a lot of conversation. Let's see. All right, Captain Van Krenen says Tribbles. Oh yes, okay. Tribbles is something worth noting. So in the first edition of the game, there was So one of the things about the first edition of Star Trek CCG was that they have a whole lot of what they call side decks. So these are little mini decks included in your 60 card deck, but they sit separate from your other decks in play. And you have cards in your main deck that then trigger and activate those side decks. One of the side decks that you can have is called a Tribble side deck, which allows you to incorporate Tribbles into your main deck. The more Tribbles that you have, it makes things happen on the board. It's complicated to get into how all that works. Those Tribble cards are also playable as a separate mini game without the rest of Star Trek CCG, and there is in fact an ongoing competitive play scene for the Tribbles TCG. So it's like a game within a game. It's not You don't use the Tribbles cards in the Tribble CCG the same way that you do use them in Star Trek CCG, but the cards work in both. So that is a thing you can do. Next question: are there shiny cards? Yes, there are. So although the game is no longer commercially available, so firstly, the original commercially available cards, there were shiny cards. I call them foils in this game. There were foils, they were quite rare, but you could find them. I've shown you a couple of my foils in my collection. But the way that you get them now is through tournament prize support. So if we organize an in-person tournament, Trek CC are authorized to print and distribute prize support foils as long as they don't receive any money for it. So there are people who donate the necessary funds to print and ship these cards. I think I might have to pay for the shipping myself if I were to organize a tournament. It's been a while since I've done that. But essentially, they receive no funds for doing this. It's completely not for profit. But it is possible to get printed foil version of these cards in physical format, even though they are virtual cards. Would be nice if they could include some of the newer shows. Yes, it would be nice. So there are tools available, although TrekCC doesn't authorize this, and they are not legal for play in any kind of tournament play. It is possible to find tools that allow you to customize your own cards, and people who have done this will publicize on various forums online their versions of what a USS Discovery card might look like, or a Michael Burnham, or a USS Protostar, or whatever. So that you could, if you wanted to, print and play those cards, although they are not legal. In any formats, you could, if you wanted to, try them out if it's just for fun. So that's a thing that is available, but again, not supported, not tournament legal. So it's almost as if they don't exist. Commander Shamali says, "What cool overhead camera is this?" That's a very cool overhead camera loaned to me by Commander Shamali. So it was very fancy. Thank you. I appreciate that. We need more of this. Yes, if we decide that we want to keep doing this kind of thing, maybe I'll invest in my own setup so we can do this more regularly. But I'm glad that I was able to do a quick demo for you guys today. Kumin Kotia says, "How is this overhead view achieved? I'm looking for a similar view for recording games." So the setup consists of a photographic tripod with a nice HD webcam attached to it, which is pointing down at my tabletop. Commander Shimali, I see, she answered that as well. Let's see. All right. One wins triples not using tokens. Yeah. So the first edition of the game didn't use the energy tokens system for purchasing cards. Doesn't. There are a lot of details that were different, and the energy token purchasing for cards was added in second edition. I think is one of the most important balancing elements of the game. First edition decks became completely unbalanced and would do ridiculous things simply because there weren't rules against that kind of thing. But the second edition of the game, the complexity is sort of fenced in such a way that it's a lot more fair. I think it's less likely that you'll be able to build a deck that completely steamrolls your opponent, like you can in some games like Magic. It's just you just kind of can't do it in Star Trek CCG Second Edition. Tasha Yara is great. Yes, she is. So is Scylla. Let's see. Yeah, I do have a Scylla card here somewhere. I think she's in one of my Romulan decks. Commander Shimali says, "I probably have Cunning 3 or something." I mean, who knows? The baseline for humans in the game is 5. So average human intelligence is 5, which is why Data has 10, because he's super smart. Somebody like 7 of 9 also has like 9 or 10. And pack leads have like 2 or 3. Klingons also tend not to be the smartest, unfortunately, which is why Klingon decks have a card called Way of the Warrior that allows you to replace the cunning or integrity requirements of any mission with strength instead, so they can brute force their way through it, which is pretty cool. All right. We're talking about Klingons. Yes, good. Glory to the Empire. That was nice. Yes, so I'm not going to do a full demonstration of Klingons in this video. Maybe in some future video we can looking at examining some other flavors of the deck. Cadet Ship Destroyer. Yes, so Commander Shamali is asking about my Cadet Ship Destroyer deck. So this is a deck that uses only cadets. It's a Federation deck, uses only cadets and only Defiant class starships. And like a Klingon deck, it flies over to my opponent's side of the table, destroys their ship, and then comes back and completes missions. I think it's quite an aggressive deck, and it's something that people don't tend to expect from a Federation deck, which is one of the reasons why I enjoy it. We can DIY. Yes, yeah, so as I mentioned, there are digital ways of DIYing these cards. Getting foils printed or getting any cards printed on any kind of official card stock is difficult. In fact, for the print and play cards, they actually recommend that you don't use try to use any kind of fancy cardstock. What you should be using is just regular paper and then sleeving it with regular cards. Let me show you an example. So this, the USS Enterprise J, this is one of the virtual cards. I don't have an original printed version of this, so I printed and this version of the card, and then I sleeved it behind an old Star Trek CCG card. So this is the card that it was sleeved with. This is just an ordinary normal size TCG sleeve. This is what the card back looks like, by the way, from the original Decipher TCG cards, and then you cut this out so that it can fit inside the sleeve in front there. For official tournament play, it's required in the rules that you have to sleeve your cards with original Star Trek CCG cards. They have the backing. Fortunately, I have so many original Star Trek CCG cards, especially my old first edition cards that I no longer play with, that if we were to play an in-person tournament, I could provide enough backing cards to all of us that you could sleeve all of your cards if you wanted to. But for casual play, you can use any card you want as long as it's a standard CCG size, which is the same size as Magic the Gathering cards. If you've ever played Magic the Gathering for more than 5 minutes, you probably have a bunch of commons lying around that you will never play with, perhaps an abundance of basic lands. In fact, if you go to just about any local gaming store and you ask them for some basic lands, they will happily hand you armfuls of them. So just free cards that are exactly the right size, they have the right thickness so that they can fit in these sleeves. And then if you print your printable card on regular paper, so not on any kind of thick cardstock, it doesn't significantly add to the thickness of the sleeved card so that it still feels like a normal card in your hand. And then it's virtually impossible to tell the difference between the printed and original card from the back while the deck is shuffled, which is really kind of the point. You need to be able to not tell the difference, because otherwise you could be accused of cheating, and nobody wants that. All right, I think that is. We've got some comments on YouTube. Let me look at those. Lucky CCG has a Linux version. Yes, it does. That doesn't surprise me. They will pay you to take basic land cards. Yes, they definitely will. When I was running my local game store, we had boxes and boxes of them. We simply couldn't get, like, we had to have bonfires to get rid of them. We couldn't find anybody to take them. All right, so YouTube, we have some questions. In my experience, in what ways can the Star Trek CCG become unbalanced for new players? The nice thing about the second edition is that it's the balance is kind of baked into the system. It can become unbalanced, but only in late game or when it comes to poor deck construction. So if you have built your own deck, but you don't really know what you're doing, you're going to struggle against more experienced players. But that's what's great about the print and play dynamic, is that you can go onto the website and you can find whatever deck won the last national or world's tournament, and you can download and print and play that deck. And once you've played the deck a couple times, you get a sense of how it works, and then you're good to go. You can play against the world's best players. Or you can, try and mess around with it, adjust it, modify it yourself. There's no rules against doing any of that kind of thing. You just add it to your own deck manager and you can play around with it, or you can play with it as is. That's also fine. Nobody owns the deck design. There's no kind of copyright. So if you are sensible about doing that kind of thing, learning about the game by playing other people's decks to start with, there are also some really good starter decks on trekcc.org that are downloadable. Although they're called starters, they're called that because they're relatively straightforward, but they are perfectly competitive. You can play them in a tournament and do fairly well because the game dynamics are so well balanced. It's quite plausible that you could do that. The old original printed starter decks that Decipher released back in 2001 or whenever it was when they released the second edition of the game, they were not meant to be fully playable out of the box. So if you're trying to play with one of those, you're going to struggle a little bit, but the new virtual starters, they are perfectly playable as is. Another question. In my opinion, can Star Trek CCG be played single player like I just did now for the demonstration? No. Not really, because you need to be able to withhold information from your opponent about what cards you have in your hand. If you're playing single player, you're not keeping any secrets from yourself. It's not really going to work. So that's fine for a demonstration, but it's really not meant to be playable that way. I'm sure somebody somewhere has published a set of rules that will allow you to play on your own. Perhaps you're playing with two different decks against each other or something like that. But I haven't tried that, and as I did now, it's not a viable play strategy. How big or competitive are the Star Trek CCG tournaments in South Africa? So the last tournament that I'm aware of happened in 2019, which was the what they call the Delta Quadrant Regionals, which I won, as a matter of fact. And that was the last one. So what happened shortly thereafter was the pandemic, which put all of the online, the in-person competitive play on hold, at least in this country. The guy who used to run the tournaments here, he emigrated, so there is currently nobody running Star Trek CCG tournaments. The scene kind of died locally. There is a very vibrant online competitive scene centered around a Discord server called the Dojo, and they play tournaments constantly. It's also the community for arranging in-person tournaments. So if we decided we wanted to run some in-person tournaments, we could do so in collaboration with that group. But we haven't tried to do that in some time. The local player base has just kind of evaporated since that last tournament. Will I be doing an unboxing stream of my sealed expansion pack? You mean this old booster pack? I want to keep this sealed. So I know that there are no cards in here that I don't already have, because this particular set, this is the original second edition set, I have in my collection the entire set. So I'm not going to get anything out of opening this. I'm just going to keep it sealed because it's nice to keep it sealed. Are there Star Trek CCG rule areas I experienced to be rather complex or confusing in such a way where the players must decide to create homebrew rules to reduce arguments? In the second edition, not so much. In first edition, definitely. Because it is so complex in the rules. Things like, for example, how to handle when a Jem'Hadar crew runs out of Ketracel White. There is this mechanic that kicks in where they start fighting each other and killing each other. So these are your own personnel that are fighting and killing each other because you don't have enough Ketracel White to feed them. That kind of complexity is just absurd. You have an interplay where you have Hirogen ships, because in first edition, Hirogen is one of the factions that are playable. Hirogen ships are able to buff each other when they're together at the same location, and they do so to absurd amounts, just ridiculous. Even a Borg cube, which is insanely overpowered in first edition, can't stand up to a pack of Hirogen ships. And then the complexity that springs from there is just out of control. In second edition, because it's so well balanced, that tends not to be the case. There are a couple of moments here or there where it's not quite clear based on the wording of a printed card. Am I supposed to read it this way or that way? But generally speaking, if you can defer to the current version of the card, because usually those things have been updated by the trekcc.org, if you can defer to the current version of the card, that's usually explained in a more in a clearer way, and then you can understand what's supposed to be done from there. Commander Shamali says, is there a draft format? Not that I'm aware of. I know that some people still trade in sealed product from the old days because various retail chains weren't able to sell out all their product before it was withdrawn, so it's still sitting in warehouses. That is obviously becoming less and less frequent. And when people come across a box of sealed product, they might hold a draft. But for a virtual card base, normal sealed wouldn't really work. The closest thing I would imagine would be something like a cube draft. So in Magic, you would have a collection of cards set up that could be playable, and your players around the table would each build a deck out of the cards in that box and then play them against each other there and then. I imagine something like that could work, but I'd have to think about what kind of card stock would be included in a cube draft, just because you have so many more affiliations in Star Trek CCG than you have colors in Magic, and although you can mix the affiliations in Star Trek CCG, it's more difficult to do so than in Magic. So if you want to give some thought to that, Commander Shamali, about how to play a Star Trek CCG cube draft, I would be curious to see what that would look like. All right, I think that is everything we needed to cover today. Thank you everybody for your patience in starting a little bit late, and also we ran quite longer than I thought we would today. And thank you also to Commander Shamali for hooking me up with this video infrastructure so that I could demonstrate to you what the game looks like. If we want to, we can do some more of these in the future. Perhaps we can look at some of the other factions or various other play formats or something like that. And I also plan to at some point do another one of these looking at the Lackey CCG virtual tabletop system for Star Trek CCG. I'm going to have to relearn how to do it because I find it quite difficult to play. It's nowhere near as intuitive as other tabletop TCGs, things like Magic Arena or Hearthstone or something like that. The Lackey CCG system does none of the work for you. It's just a virtual tabletop. All right, excellent. So thank you very much, everybody. That is it for today. You are dismissed. Swart out.